Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the October 16th Government Relations and Communications Committee meeting. We'll begin with introductions, and we want to welcome back Abby Adicula. She came around a second time. We didn't scare her off after the first meeting, so welcome back, Abby. Welcome back our teacher representative, Amy McNally, and to our committee members, Lydia, co-chair Chuck, and Sarah Dunn. And our administrative liaison, Mr. Petiti, will perhaps walk us through his administrative remarks.
I have none this evening.
Okay.
That was quick.
All right. Well, then let's get public comment underway. Does anybody have any public comment to make this evening or afternoon, actually? That's right. It's going to get dark out soon, and then it's going to feel like evening.
It'll be Halloween before we know it.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Sherry.
Good afternoon. Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle, Newtown Square. Some of the previously asked questions that were listed online, I could not really find the answers to the questions. So, but I'll include those with my list. First question, how will the committee determine that 1/2-hour meetings are ideal? Second question, which was number 2, how will policy 903A3's AR be enforced regarding parents and students? The response was not to my question, and specifically, I'm pointing to the news media relations, which states students shall not be permitted to give school information or interviews to external news media representatives without prior approval of the district's director of communications or superintendent. And also, out of respect for the privacy of all students, parents, guardians are requested to refrain from distributing online, on social media, or to the news media personal photographs they may take on district property or at district school events of students who are not their children. I'd like to know how those parts of that AR will be enforced. And then my question number 4, will the online responses to questions include the name of the administrator, and I thought I had said this, but also school board member responsible for answering the question? That was not answered. It says refer to September business meeting, refer to September business meeting. I looked, I just could not find the answers to those questions. And just because this is communication, here are some other questions. If written answers to public questions are preferable, why not treat board members' questions the same way? If it's so important to have accuracy in responding to the public's question, why isn't it equally important to respond accurately to board members' questions at a meeting and provide them with a written response a half an hour or a couple of hours before the next meeting? Who determined that the best time to post responses was noon before committee meetings that sometimes start at 4:30? And do all board members review the responses for accuracy before they are published? Oftentimes it kind of feels like you're speaking to someone from Mars, because you ask the question, then whoof, it goes up, and then several weeks later there's some kind of a written response to the question, and it's hard to even sometimes understand the context with which it was asked. Number 6. Is that my question here? Sure. But, what process is being created to improve communication with the township? Who is involved, and what's the timeline for that? And the answer to number 13, I asked what was a positive result that came out of the meetings that were held behind closed doors with the legislators. And my question is, do you think that Mr. Vitale would have reached the same conclusion if the meeting had been held in public? And what specific message did he send out to the public regarding the issue? And finally, last question is, why doesn't the board write goals following a SMART format? SMART standing for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-sensitive. Because a lot of times with these goals, it sounds like no matter what you put down, you achieved your goal. You just made a list of different things that applied to the goal, and voila, you were achieving it. And I think it would be helpful if the goals were specific. So not only are you going to participate on a team, for instance, but the team's going to win 3 of 4 matches or something. And then at the end of the time, you can say, yeah, you achieved that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. Any other public comment? Good afternoon, Mrs. Spurtle.
Good afternoon, Ms. Goldman. Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. Couple questions from the minutes. Ms. Goldman had brought up about the legislature and that there was going to be a resolution to study college and university vaccinations and also about applying suntan lotion. Whether or not that came up on September 25th or not is my question. And also under the goals, the list of what exactly was done for each goal. Working with Radnor community, there was the homestead exclusion amendment to the PA Constitution that was passed in the last election. And my question was, if it passed, does that mean that it went automatically to the governor's desk for his signature, or is there a pending time frame for the changes that will be made as a result of that amendment, which I believe had to do with, the homestead exclusion? And also on the goals for 2018-19, looking at the slides, there are no goals. It looks like there'll be goals planning, and will the goals be the same as they were in 2017, since you reviewed all of 2017? And also, if going along with what Ms. Sherry had said, if there were a timeline or definite goals or definite dates for completions of the goals, that would make a lot more sense to the public looking to see how well you've all done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other public comment this evening? Seeing none, let's go into the approval of minutes. Does anybody have any concerns about last month's minutes?
I did not.
No? Is that a no from Ms. Solomon over there too?
Yep.
Ms. McNally? Ms. Adicula? All good? Okay. Well, then we will say the minutes are approved, and we'll move into our first agenda item, which is our legislative update, an extra special legislative update edition, given that we are in the final days of the 2-year Pennsylvania legislative session. So essentially what that means is that anything that doesn't get passed in the remaining 2 days of the House and Senate convening goes into the waste bin, and we'll start it all over again in January. So, Mr. Petiti, tell us what's happened.
Yes, so thank you. If you look at the legislative report that was attached to these meetings agenda items, we'll really go through this as our primer on where things are, and start with Senate Bill 1095 and just some news that came out just yesterday and today that is headed to the governor's desk. And that is, for some background on that, everyone, that is the legislation to provide alternatives to passing high-stakes exams to prove readiness to graduate high school. So basically—
Excuse me, Mr. Petiti. Sure. I think you had sent out a note to the committee, at least I hope so, that we had posted 2 additional attachments.
Yes.
Based on the timing of when the session met. We've got some additional information. Is it possible to pop them up on the computer there so that people can see? It didn't make the packet. It was attached to board docs.
How come they have it and we don't?
It might be in the attachments here. Did you grab one of these? Did you grab one of these?
It is not in our packet?
But it's in the packet for the public.
The packets were produced at
packet.
Friday
We'll take
morning,
those
and the session ended Friday afternoon. So we got updates after the legislative session ended, and we posted them to board docs. So if you want to follow along.
Okay.
sometimes you're at the mercy of the legislators. So in this case, we are. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
hopefully that's helpful to everybody to see this.
Helps us reset a little bit.
Yes.
So we start with Senate Bill 1095, which is a big deal for us because we have a history dating back to 2013, and Mr. Madden will be able to attest to this when he actually testified in front of the PA Education Committee, Senate Education Committee, in August 2013. And then this is all regarding the Keystone exams and our belief, dating back to that time, 5 years ago, that there should not be a graduation requirement to pass the Keystone exams. And so starting in 2013, in September of 2013 or October, we passed a resolution. The school board did another resolution in 2016 regarding this. The first resolution was accompanied by a campaign letting the parents know that they should protest the Keystone exams as a graduation requirement and let their representatives know this is not something that they want to be in place. And so SB 1095 allows for other ways to get your credentials to graduate from high school besides passing a high-stake test like a Keystone exam. And that bill is going to the governor for a signature. Did you want to add anything to that, Ms. Coleman?
No, I just wanted, Keystones in essence are still a graduation requirement to a certain extent. It's just that if the Keystones in and of themselves, the student doesn't score proficient on a new composite score of all 3 Keystone exams, there are alternative pathways to meet the state's graduation requirement besides just achieving the composite score on the 3 exams. Previously, students had to score proficient on each of the 3 graduation exams, the Keystone exams, algebra, literature, and biology. And now it hasn't been set yet, but the Department of Education and the State Board of Education will come up with a composite score so that, for example, if you don't do so well, let's say on the literature, but you'd score proficient in algebra or biology, if those 3 scores combined satisfy the composite score set by the State Board of Education or the Department of Education, that would satisfy the Keystone graduation requirement. If you do not score proficient on that newly established composite score, then there are now also alternative pathways to satisfy the state's graduation requirement. And there are 3 alternative pathways. So one of the things I wanted to just mention as an idea to this committee is that it occurred to me that perhaps we might want to check with the administration of the high school and the middle school to see if this might be a valuable information session, because these pathways are a little convoluted. They're hard to recite off the top of your head, and there are many the devil is in the details, so to speak. So I just wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts on this legislation that Governor Wolf will likely sign any minute now, and whether or not we want to champion that kind of an information session, not unlike what we did with Senate Bill 2, and maybe we do it in partnership with curriculum or something like that. Open to parents and...
I think, number one, I thank Senator McGarrigle, because I think this is a really great first step in moving towards a first step. Yeah, this is definitely a first step. I think we all know that. I mean, there are many questions that I have. So I think having an information session is great, but I think some things have to be specified from the state. So, for example, they talk about, a state acceptable SAT score. Well, what is
Right.
that going to be?
Well, just like the composite score, that has
Right.
not been established.
Yeah,
There'll be
and-
guidance that comes to schools, I'm sure, after the bill is signed.
Exactly, and some things kind of contradict each other, or one another, I should say. So I do think that, I wonder how that information, and maybe you guys can answer this, comes down from the state, and when we get that information, in terms of a timeline. Because if we have an information session, I don't know if we have all the information yet to provide that.
Well, the information session would obviously be after we have those details, and the key parts of this will be formulated, like I said, by the State Board and PDE, and PDE usually issues guidance to the school districts. So when we receive that, we'll be able to disseminate the information, and just thought maybe it would be an interesting idea to have, an open public information session to let people know this is a whole different approach right now to Keystones. It didn't remove the graduation requirement entirely, but it provides alternative pathways. I still personally think that some of the pathways don't solve all the problems, but there are more options now than there were before. So, thoughts?
Well, I guess I, like many parents in the district, kind of have just been assuming they'd keep kicking this can down the road and it wouldn't actually implement the Keystone as a graduation requirement. Do we think, though, that this bill is going to make the legislature feel comfortable that it is okay to make the Keystone exam an actual requirement? I know it currently is set for the class of 22, but we don't think it's going to keep getting kicked down the road once they have an out like this.
It's hard to, yeah, it's hard.
Well, because I'll tell you, from the reason I ask is from an informational perspective, I think you're going to have a lot of parents who say, as long as it's not going to apply to my kids, or I think it'll get pushed off for a couple. I think it's worth having a sense of whether it's going to apply. One of the things I'm not clear about, you probably actually just know this off the top of your head, do you wait and take the Keystone exams your senior year, or can you take, like if you're a kid who takes algebra freshman year, you can take the Keystone then, so you know whether or not you've done well enough.
But you know that the graduation requirement is in hiatus anyway at this point.
Right.
This does not put the graduation requirement back into effect.
Right.
This is what's supposed to happen when the graduation requirement is scheduled to go back into effect, that this program would take its place. So
Okay.
right now, parents, I do think, for those kids who are on the bubble or concerned about it, are making the decision, well, do I even bother if I have a child who's graduating in 2019, take the Keystones, because it doesn't count for a graduation requirement.
Right.
So, this is sort of, I think, a school district by school district conundrum. And, I'm not saying that we should have an information session, but I just wanted to put out there the fact that this could be potentially very confusing.
I think in this case,
Your mic's not on.
there we go. I think in this case, the prudent thing to do is to wait, because Chuck and I have been through 8 years of ups and downs with this thing, to the point, there was a point 7 years ago when we were told we were going to have 7 Keystone exams that everyone was going to have to pass, and then it was only going to be 4, and now it's just 3, but there's still going to be requirements, and then, well, we're not going to decide on that for another year, pushed it out again. We went through the point at the high school of making everyone take it, and then if you didn't pass it, you had to go into remediation so you could pass it, and now all that's gone away. So having lived this, I think it's way too soon to really say if this is an issue we want to even talk about further. We just don't know enough. And so, let's wait. Let's just wait and see what they decide, and they may not even deal with it this session, and it's just too soon. So I don't want to take our time on something we just don't know anything more about. And, frankly, we've given it a lot of time in the past, and it keeps changing.
Well, but I think, an information session for parents who may be anxious about this, if they have ninth graders who just took algebra and they want to know.
I know, but the history is that we made everybody take the Keystones in preparation that they were going to be a requirement, and then it turned out to not be the case, and a lot of kids lost their electives because we did that, because we were going to be ahead of the curve and make sure everybody passed it.
But Lydia, this isn't making kids take an exam. This is offering their parents the information if their parents want them to take an exam.
What we don't know yet. So
Well,
it
that's what
caused,
Amy's
it has
saying till we get some
caused
information.
disruption in the past, and I think we just need to wait. My opinion.
We do know about this. This has made news everywhere. There has been a shift. And while we don't know if this new plan will change between now and its date of implementation, what we do know is that this is a major, especially because it came from our region of southeastern Pennsylvania, championed by Senator McGarrigle in Amy McNally's district, actually. We do know that this has changed. And there are parents, I am quite sure, who call the schools all the time saying, what's the deal with the Keystone graduation requirement? So while we can't make any guarantees that nothing will ever change, I'm pretty sure that parents will have heard about this and have some questions. Now, whether it rises to the level of an information session or just a memo from the principals, I don't know. I just wanted to put it out there as food for thought, because I always feel like part of our charge as a committee, when we follow legislation the way we do, is that if something comes out that's as noteworthy as this, it's been worked on for years and years, it just feels appropriate to me to raise the issue of disseminating big pieces of legislation, to raise the possibility of our proposing disseminating this information to the community. So that's all. It's not, that's really all I wanted to.
One other thing, Amy? In terms of especially the high school, and we have kids who are taking algebra at Keystone at the middle school as well. So to talk about how this, if it affects what we're doing at all in our services, and Ms. Idicule here is talking about the remedial courses and things like that. So maybe that kind of information session from the local schools, just to kind of give information about how, if they decide things may change. I don't know, like something like that. Is that what you mean?
If I can just quickly, I think if I'm figuring out what we're all trying to accomplish, it sounds to me like the governor's signing, something here that is going to, at least as of now, change the way students can be qualified to graduate in terms of 4 different pathways or several different pathways. 2021 is when this will go into effect, if it does go into effect. So what's that, 2 years, correct?
Class of 2022.
Class 2022. Okay, so we have 3 years, correct? I think the discussion is, do we just present this information as here's what the governor's going to sign? It's changing the way what we currently know, and here's the information, and with the caveat that it could change. Or do we just say it could change and just kind of wait a little bit and see how it goes? I guess that's what we're kind of talking about.
I personally think the school administrators would be the people to ask and say, are you getting questions from parents? And if you are, we're offering the possibility of helping.
If it's a major change like this, I believe that the administrators, and in particular curriculum committee, will pick that up if this is something that's going to change what we're going to do.
Oh,
So
operations, yeah.
somebody's going to pick it up if it's a big change.
It is. Can I just make a comment? I think that it is a step possibly in the right direction. I think it's a waste of time and money putting into testing our kids, continually testing them, giving them avenues to graduate when we do a fantastic job with our kids now. I think it's a waste of taxpayer money. I've been opposed to this, from the beginning. It's cost a lot of our kids time. They had to do remedial work, so they lost the opportunity to seek what their passion might be, something that we have as our mission. Now, that said, what I would like to see us come up with some things that we would like to know before we have an information session about it. For instance, if it is going to affect the way the principal is scheduling classes, because as Sarah said, does this actually take place on when it's supposed to? And if this then is going to become the law and not continue to get pushed down, then it does change the landscape. This is then going to become real. So the rationale of why it was passed, I think that's important for our superintendent and for our high school principal to come in and say, this new law is going to change the way we're scheduling the remediation process and things like that. And once we have a lot of that information together, maybe you could field questions from parents that they would then be able to come up with something where we would have the information and answer the questions based on, what's real and what the numbers are when all that stuff comes out. Because if it does become law and we do have to do it, it's going to cost. It's going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to cost us a lot of time, and it's going to, I believe, disrupt the educational process that we're delivering to our students. So I would be in favor of moving forward once we get all this information, and then let people know what we're talking about, because quite frankly, yeah, I don't know right now.
Okay. I'm sorry, Abby wanted to say something?
Hi, I just wanted to agree with Mr. Madden because from a student aspect, the Keystones take up a big chunk of time. We actually do a lot preparing for the Keystones. And sometimes it's not that we don't understand the material. For me, I usually understand the material perfectly fine, and I have a friend who didn't pass the Keystones, but he did fine in the class. Is the Keystones, the testing, I don't think testing is always an accurate representation of how much a student knows, and then making them retake a course for half the year when they could have been taking a course that they actually wanted to learn about, that I feel that's more beneficial for the student, and later on in life that would help them more than having to retake a class. So I think this would be great if they had other options. But also, a lot of these have to do with testing and grades, and I wish it was more specific with that, because most students take the SAT, ACT junior year, and so it'd be nice to know what we have to score before knowing to prepare.
Right. And that information. That information, Abby, will be part of what's called the guidance that comes out of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So we will know what average score on an ACT and SAT are going to qualify as a substitute for a Keystone, score of proficiency on a Keystone, and what the grades have to be in the coursework that matches up with the topic of the Keystones and all those details. Those will come down eventually from the Department of Education.
We need to send her to Harrisburg. They need to hear this.
So,
Can I just say one last thing? I know we're running out too much time, but I did say this is a good first step, because even many of the colleges are really swinging the pendulum the other way and studying SAT optional. I know many of the colleges my daughter applied to are SAT optional, and they're watching, they're studying over the next 5 years. Hey, are we seeing a correlation between how kids are performing in high school, especially kids who are coming out of rigorous classes? You know, if the state's doing their job, and the standards are doing their job, and the administration, the teachers are doing their jobs, and the kids are doing their jobs, then we shouldn't need to reassess that, because our classes are delivered with rigor. And, I just have to say that, because moving to an SAT score, to me, when even the colleges are starting to swing the other way, I think we really, I think Senator McGarrigle did a great first step, but I think that there is more work to be done.
right, and it's always interesting what the details reveal when they come down. So we'll watch for that, and I think Mr. Petiti took some notes on the feedback. I could see him scribbling feverishly over there, and we can move forward from
I just
that.
have one more question. I guess that would be, what's happening to our students that are now in 10th, 11th, and 12th? And are there any remedial classes being offered?
Yes.
Yeah, there are. But
Yes.
why then? Because it's not required. And we
There-
know it's not going to, but we know it's not going to be just in case, because,
The seniors, the current freshmen.
the current freshmen, yeah, right, but what I'm saying is.
Optional remedial courses,
But
they
if
don't have
this,
to go into them.
well, then, I don't know. I would like if we're going to have some answers, I would like what we actually do at our high school, okay? Because of the fact that I believe we're still offering remedial classes. And now we know that they're not going to kick it down the road. They may put this in place, so these kids won't have to do it.
You know what, and I
So that's a
feel pretty-
conversation.
I feel pretty confident that the administrators of the schools are just as curious as we are about all the details,
But it
because,
changes from school to school. Our school has been very strict with this. Other schools were not. Other schools didn't have remediation put in place. We chose to do that, and that was principal-led through the superintendent. But what I'm saying is, let's find out what we're doing now in relation to this new business. That's all.
okay. So anyway, that was our conversation on 1095, and we're almost out of time. 1095, right? So,
And there's several other pieces of legislation of interest through this report, so I would recommend, since we are closing in on 5 here, it is attached to board docs, and there's great summaries that the PSBA has provided the public, and
Yeah.
and also, just to put a plug in for the other attachment on board docs, is a nice close look from PSBA at SB 1095.
Right.
That can also be accessed through board docs.
right. That other big bill that's going to the governor is House Bill 1386, which consolidates the certification for special education teachers in an effort to try to foster more faculty in special education than are currently available. So, okay, let's move on to the goals. Mr. Petiti, that part of our agenda?
So, Did you want to try to fit these in tonight, or did you want to, I mean, we could try to do a quick 5 minutes.
Let's say something about it, yeah.
Okay, let's do that. I want to pull up the presentation. I can locate it real fast here. So, in this presentation that is, again, also in board docs, the goals for last year, I won't read them all, but here they are, the 3 goals. And we can look at the ways that these goals were accomplished. Again, won't read through the entire list, but you can see there's several bullet points here, including for website accessibility, certain deadlines that were met, that were stipulated by the Office of Civil Rights, that we were able to take care of those to meet our requirements under making sure our website's accessible. You can see several instances there of action taken throughout the year. Same thing goes under the working with the Radnor community and district and local representatives. You can see several bullet points there that indicate all the work that we did in connecting with our community to advocate for certain things that impact public education. And then we also, of course, adopted two resolutions last year regarding safety and the opposition to voucher programs.
Correct, and I think the question, if I heard it correctly, that had come up in the public about the amendment to the state constitution, I don't know if it's on here or not, but our
Yes,
efforts, right, our
first bullet point,
efforts to
yes.
push back on an amendment that was a pathway to Senate Bill 76 that would have eliminated property taxes and replaced them with increased sales and usage tax and an dramatically increased personal income tax failed miserably in Radnor. And, by the way, in some surrounding communities, because they heard what we were doing and sort of jumped on our bandwagon. But I think that's a perfect example of how, when you see it up there, 4,615 no's to 1,000 yeses in Radnor, that's advocacy. That's protecting public education. And we did that here, thanks under the auspices of the Government Relations Committee with support from our full board and administration and community. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're charged with doing, and we'll continue to do that as a committee to make sure that Harrisburg doesn't try to trample on public education. So
then we move to the 18-19 goals planning, and just to get us started, because again we're running against it or over it here. This gives us an idea of our timeline from last year, and that was kind of the point of this slide. It wasn't to talk about the goals we have. We're just planning right now, and that gives us some idea of the timeline again. So again, we do have November to go over our goals. That was when they were approved last year, but still, if we can plan them and get them in place, we could do it for November, and then obviously if we need December, we could take that too and have a half of school year worth of goals to implement.
Can I make a suggestion? And I understand the various committees and why we're down to a half hour and trying to fit things in, but I think that for a goal planning session, given that we are going to talk about other things, we're going to have public comment, that a half hour is too tight. And I know November is a really tight month for meetings, but I personally could make an effort to be here at 4. I know that's maybe tight for some of our representatives, but if we could start at 4 and have a full hour next month, if the chair and the vice chair would be willing to do that, I would appreciate that opportunity so we can address our goals in a thoughtful manner.
Co-chairs are 150% on board with that, so
I'm listening.
I'm here anyway.
I'm listening.
and it sounds like most, if not all, the people around this table would be more than happy to do
I'm
that.
sure someone will place a call to your coach if that's necessary.
But we could have just come up with draft goals in our leadership meeting with Mr. Petiti, but we wanted to sort of give you time as a committee to think about goals for this committee for the upcoming year, and we'll have a more fleshed out this conversation about it next time around.
You mean it's not Abby's job to come up with our goals?
Yes, actually, Abby, well, we don't want to send her running after only 2 meetings. But yes, so thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance and participation today, and we'll see you in November. Oh, I'm so sorry, closing public comment, I forgot. Do we have a quick public comment or two? Would anybody like to make a very quick public comment to conclude our meeting? No? No? Okay. Thank you very much.